At the end of what can only be considered a phenomenally successful season by Brighton and Hove Albion, the Seagulls said goodbye to two of their key stars, Alexis McAllister and Moises Caicedo. It was even admitted publicly by manager Roberto De Zerbi that both players have likely played their last games for Brighton. But why? There was a time when that was a given for Brighton's best players to leave for, quote, better clubs, as is often the case with stars of most mid-table clubs. But Brighton just finished 6th in the Premier League, ahead of Tottenham, ahead of Chelsea. They're slated for the European competition for the first time in their history, the same European competition that Liverpool will be playing in next season. Brighton is no longer an also-ran club in the Premier League. They are a well-run, well-coached, top 6 club now playing in Europe, at least for the next year. So I want to ask, is it still justifiable to leave for greener pastures, at least as much as it once was? Or are players like McAllister and Caicedo being selfish for leaving for an easier path when their own path just got a lot better? We're going to answer that question here on Pints and Punditry. The hierarchy is changing in the Premier League, and with that we need to change the status quo. So that's what we're going to do here today. But before we get started, please hit that subscribe button for me and like this video while you're down there. Definitely follow us on Twitter at TotalFIFACM, where we can keep the conversation going and get the conversation started in the comment section as well, because I would love to get your thoughts on this, particularly the passionate Brighton fan base, because it's those Brighton fans that I'm really directing this towards, though, fans of any club who are used to losing its best players year after year to larger, wealthier clubs can certainly resonate with this situation. Brighton fans seem to be completely accepting of this inevitable departure by McAllister and Caicedo, and generally, to their credit, seem pretty happy that it didn't happen in January, and that the pair were still around all spring to anchor the incredible run that saw the Seagulls end up in a European spot in the table. And, given Brighton's history, it's understandable why this is the mentality. The best players all leave for better opportunities eventually, so the mentality is just to enjoy them while they're on the South Coast, try to sell them as high as possible, and then replenish the pipeline of young talent. And for the most part, that's worked, particularly recently. We see where they ended up in the table. But it's worked so well that the expectations, should they now be higher? Brighton and its fans have come to accept the departure of its star players as inevitable because, the best players want things that Brighton traditionally have not been able to offer. A chance to play meaningful league games all season, a chance to potentially win a title, and a chance to compete in Europe. But Brighton can now offer all of those things. No, maybe they're not going to compete for the Premier League title next season, as long as Manchester City remains intact. Nobody is. But they are certainly within striking distance of competing with that next tier of big clubs in the league, like Arsenal, Newcastle, Manchester United, and what should be a completely revamped Liverpool team. They should be in that mix that are competing with Manchester City. At least they would be if they could hold on to McAllister and Caicedo. If Brighton could keep the main pieces of its current club intact and then add a piece or two into the fold, they'd be well suited to continue their ascent up the Premier League ladder. But instead they find themselves back in a familiar place at the sellers table, watching their best players walk out the door, likely headed to those very teams with whom they need to be closing the gap, not widening. In previous years, the well-wishing makes sense. We want to see those we love, nourish, and help grow go on to bigger and better things. Brighton has operated as the parents of many eventual Premier League stars, happy to nurture their development and then allow them to leave the nest. But now their nest allows for the growth that those players seek. McAllister and Caicedo don't need to go elsewhere to experience European football. We've got European football at home. Sure, it's the Europa League, not the Champions League, which carries not as much prestige, but these are young players with time in front of them to be a part of something special. These aren't aging veterans like Harry Kane who are looking for one last chance at glory before the decline period sets in. If Pascal Grobe, who's about to turn 32, wants to move on to make a run at the Champions League, so be it. That makes more sense. But McAllister's 24 and Caicedo is 20. They are the future if they wanted to stay. Doesn't anybody want a statue anymore? It's one thing for a player like Declan Rice to move on. In his heart of hearts, he probably doesn't want to leave West Ham, but he knows they'll never be able to give him what his career needs and deserves. And that's been the mentality of plenty of players who have moved on from Brighton and others over the years, and rightly so. But ask a player like Calvin Phillips how that's worked out for him. Yeah, technically he's a Premier League champion, having won a title with Manchester City after leaving Leeds United this past summer, but he also barely played. He was a star with Leeds, and his departure undeniably helped lead to their relegation. But with City, he couldn't get off the bench. He sought glory, and he ended up getting a front row seat to it, but he didn't get to be a part of it. McAllister and Caicedo are on the cusp of something great at Brighton, if only they were willing to hang on long enough to see it through. No, maybe they won't be playing Champions League football this year, but it is within reach, and that's new. Players leave places like Brighton to go chase glory, but can you imagine the glory that would befall the men that lead Brighton to the Champions League, or a Premier League title? They would be legends, gods of the South Coast with statues adorning club premises and children being named after them. Anybody can go to Arsenal or Manchester United or Manchester City and be a part of greatness. They'd be a small part of it, but they'd get to be there. But the opportunity to be the centerpiece of it only comes along once. It's like McAllister and Caicedo had already determined that they were going to have to move in order to achieve such things like Champions League access, and they didn't stop to realize the opportunity that is now in front of them at home. And it's a shame. I've been a huge advocate of the smaller clubs only selling their players at the time that's most convenient to them and not caving to the schedules and demands dictated by the bigger clubs that they're selling to and that they're chasing in the table. I even made a video about that topic commending Brighton for holding on to Caicedo this past January despite both the player and Arsenal really pushing to make a move. But it's time we stop looking at Brighton as one of those automatically selling clubs. They're too good for that now. If they can't match a salary for a player, fine. Then that player is clearly willing to put money before opportunity, and I don't begrudge any player making a living. But assuming Brighton is willing to open their wallets, and they have more money to work with the better they do, especially now that they're going to be playing in Europe, the argument of leaving for better opportunity simply doesn't carry the weight it once did. Not at Brighton. If Alexis McAllister and Moises Caicedo want the chance to compete at the highest level and ensure they actually play, they need look no further than where they are right now. They should be more concerned with who Brighton is adding this summer and less concerned with them being the addition elsewhere. Their decision to leave feels like a hangover effect from what Brighton once was, a feisty upstart, well-run club who was a thorn in the side of bigger Premier League clubs, right up to the point where they served as their developmental squad. But such is no longer the case. Brighton is here to play with the big clubs. They beat out two of them, Chelsea and Tottenham, for European spots. They've got one of the best managers in Europe, and until they sell their top youngsters, they've got a roster that's ready to compete for years. Alexis McAllister and Moises Caicedo have a chance to be a part of something truly great, rather than jump to something that's already great. In the past, nobody would have blamed them, but the present is different. Brighton is now a club of opportunity, if only the players are willing to stick around to see it. That's going to do it for us here on Pints and Punditry. I would love to get your comments on this topic below. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button for me while you're at it. And definitely don't forget to follow us on Twitter at TotalFIFACM. Thanks as always for joining us on Pints and Punditry. This is Total FIFA Career Mode.